Okay, so we're going to get started. Um, Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network, or GeoBon, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. So today's webinar is towards biodiversity and health indicators, and this is hosted by the GeoBon One Health Working Group. My name is Katie Millette. I am the Executive Secretary of GeoBon. GeoBon is a global community of academics, biodiversity experts, and policy partners, all working together to improve monitoring of biodiversity across the world. Today, we have a very special webinar because we're going to be addressing the growing recognition that both science and policy is that, in both science and policy, which is that biodiversity and human health are deeply intertwined. The relationship between biodiversity and human health is complex, profound, and increasingly recognized as central to our collective well-being. As we continue to navigate global challenges from pandemics to climate change, from habitat loss to food insecurity, it's clear that human health can't be separated from the health of ecosystems and wildlife. The newly adopted Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the COP decision 16/9 at the CBD has sent a clear signal that there is now a global consensus that maintaining healthy ecosystems is essential for preventing diseases, supporting food and water security, and enhancing overall well-being. But turning to this vision into a measurable and to measurable progress needs tools, and most importantly, it needs indicators. And these indicators need to be robust, science-based, and policy relevant. So as biodiversity monitoring experts at GeoBon, we believe that one of the most pressing tasks ahead is to develop indicators that can help make these connections visible, viable, measurable, and actionable for countries. One of the goals of the GeoBon One Health Working Group is to build a framework of biodiversity and health indicators that can help guide policy and inform environmental decisions to help us track change across geographic scales. This is complex. I don't think I need to tell you all that. It's highly interdisciplinary work, but our strength lies in our diversity of our community. So whether your background is in ecology, public health, Earth observations, modeling, or indigenous knowledge systems, your expertise is critical in highlighting and capturing the full spectrum of biodiversity and health linkages. So today's webinar is just the beginning. We hope this will be a much larger conversation. It's a standing open invitation to you all to help join this initiative, to help co-develop tools and indicators and knowledge that we need to understand the linkages between health and biodiversity. So I'm excited to have you all with us. I'm first pleased to introduce our today's speakers. So we have 3 speakers that are going to be joining us today, and I'll start with Alice Hughes. So Alice is a conservation biologist. Her expertise bridges biodiversity research and policy in addressing global conservation challenges and to promote better biodiversity assessments and monitoring. She's a professor at the University of Melbourne. She has extensive experience working in the Asia-Pacific region with expertise in wildlife trade and also the One Health approaches for linking ecosystem health to zoonoses and spillovers. She's also a co-chair of GeoBon, and she is a coordinating lead author of the IPBES monitoring assessment on the monitoring. She will be talking to us today about One Health, what it is and why it's important. So in a sec, we'll get to Alice. But our second speaker will be Helena Chapman. Helena serves as the executive coordinator of the GeoHealth Community of Practice, as well as the associate program manager for health and air quality applications in the Earth Science Division at NASA headquarters. These programs encourage innovative applications of Earth observation data to enhance health decision-making and air quality management, prevention, and control of infectious diseases and other environmental health topics. She has a PhD in public health, and she has a master's of public health and epidemiology, as well as a medical doctorate from the University of Dominican Republic. Then we'll go to Tim. Tim Poisson is a full professor in computational ecology at Université de Montréal. He is the co-investigator at the Bioemergence Research Initiative, where he develops open data for pandemic preparedness. He is a group lead of the GeoBon Working Group on One Health, so he is our sort of leader of this working group. And he's going to tell us about the objectives of the working group and some of the ongoing work that they're doing with this ongoing CBD process to develop indicators for biodiversity and health. And then lastly, we have Francis Banville, and Francis is a postdoc fellow at the Biological Sciences in the Université de Montréal. His research focuses on the usability of biodiversity indicators on monitoring One Health actions. So once again, thank you all very much for joining us. I'm going to now pass the mic and the screen over to Alice, and she's going to present One Health Initiative. We ask that you hold your questions to the end. We will have some time for questions, and also to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared. So if you miss anything or want to share with your colleagues, you can. So now, Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So it's great to be with everyone tonight, or at least it's tonight in my part of the world. Of course, this is an issue that spans globally as well as many time zones. So we appreciate the fact that all of you could be on this call. Now, hopefully most of you will understand what One Health is, but because we are in such a diverse group and some of you may be encountering the topic for the first time, we thought it would be useful to give a brief recap of what One Health is and why it's so important that we have a clearer understanding of it. And of course, coming through the pandemic, hopefully everyone is already aware of the fact that One Health is inherently important for human health, as well as the life of all other species on Earth. So what is One Health? Well, One Health is an inherently collaborative, multi-sectorial approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health. And so you can see here the schematic, which was not made by me, incorporates many of the different elements that we consider when we're talking about One Health. And of course, when you talk to different communities, they may emphasize particular elements of this. There is a huge amount of dialogue, for example, on antimicrobial resistance going on at the moment in the context of One Health. But in a group like this, where we're largely likely to be ecologists, as well as people working in the medical and veterinary professions, we need to think about the intersection of wildlife, where that overlaps with other species we may be interacting with, and human lives, and how that might be perturbed by environmental degradation or changes in parameters like climate. And of course, trying to understand how these different facets of the world intersect in order to impact on things like spillover risk is crucial if we are going to manage the potential for various zoonotic pathogens to spill over into the future. So why is it important? And why has it become a topic of global conversation in recent years? Well, we already know that there has been over 111 recent epidemic outbreaks that had zoonotic origins. Over 60% of human emerging diseases are caused by zoonotic pathogens, and 72% of these come from wildlife. And whether you're interested in viruses, bacteria, or fungi, most of these are originating in wildlife. And so if we want to understand human health, then of course it goes without saying that we need to understand those One Health perspectives, and we need to understand how any given pathogen might actually spill over into other species, into intermediate hosts, and eventually into humans. And of course, how pathogens that might be circulating in livestock may actually spill back into wildlife, and what is likely to cause the preconditions that are likely to drive these kinds of events. Thus, One Health has massive implications for the health of all life on Earth, but understanding how we can answer these questions is impossible without collaborations between people at different parts of this research life cycle. So key questions in One Health includes why, where, and when does spillover occur, and how do these different elements interact? And of course, a crucial part of that is understanding the interactions between wildlife with animals that we may come into contact with, be that domestic animals or livestock, and with humans. And part of this comes down to understanding where these interfaces lie. As we perturb ecosystems, we cause stress on native species. And of course, when species are stressed, they generally are more susceptible to getting sick. But also, as we perturb these ecosystems, we increase the interface between wildlife and other species they may either pick up pathogens from or spill pathogens to. Furthermore, as we disturb these environments, we may expose them to an array of other types of stressor, such as agrochemicals. And so, if we think about what these landscapes look like and how species move through these different spaces, of course, there are ample opportunities for them to interact with other species in different parts of these environments. But there is also the potential for them to be exposed, as I said earlier, to those agrochemicals. And of course, there are plenty of opportunities for spillover to occur in these contexts. But each of these are going to be situationally dependent, depending on when it's occurring in the year, in terms of when it is in a bat's life cycle or another animal's life cycle, and what those other disturbances in the ecosystem look like. For example, in the case of Hendra, we know that spillover is most likely to occur when it coincides with a loss of habitat and with climate extremes that cause massive ecophysiological stress and causes them to move into paddocks where they will then come into contact with horses. Now, that is an example which is incredibly complex, and yet by understanding the component parts of the system, researchers are now able to predict with high accuracy when spillovers are most likely to occur and therefore manage what those risks look like. So to understand when spillover may occur, we need to understand what these risks like from a spatial and temporal perspective. There are two major elements that increases this risk, and that is the interface between various zoonotic reservoirs and species they may either pick up pathogens from or pass them to, and of course factors that increase the potential risk and degree of viral shedding, so anything that might cause stress. The habitat loss, of course, increases both of these axes, causing them to move into suboptimal habitats, expend more energy in order to get enough food, potentially encounter agrochemicals, which cause other ecophysiological stresses, and increasing the likelihood of them encountering other species. This is going to be exacerbated further if it occurs during key demographic periods, such as reproduction, and given that in animals like bats, offspring are typically 25% of the mother's weight at birth, and they have the longest gestation for their body size. We know that if perturbation or other forms of stress occur during these periods, then you're going to have an exponential increase in spillover risk. And it's also known that at least in some species of bat, they eat 1.5 times their body weight when they're lactating, and shedding also increases during lactation. I give this amount of detail because it highlights the fact that unless we understand the ecology of species and we have these collaborations, we have no ability to understand what spillover looks like. But by having these types of data, by working with the right partners, we can begin to piece together the puzzle that allows us to understand what these risks look like in the environment, and then we can map them out further. So far, we have great case studies in a few pathogens such as Hendra, and of course, extensive work has been done on things like malaria. We know that changes in habitat availability as well as climate all impact on the spillover probability. And we understand the role of contact zones in terms of where spillover might occur. We also realize that we need to have a clear understanding of ecophysiology and how that intersects with environment, as well as how other factors like pollution and chemicals will also play roles. We can also use these kinds of data to build sophisticated models. So here is some work we've been doing in Southeast Asia where we look at the populations of humans that might be at risk of coronaviruses. Now, this is only one small link in the chain. Of course, it requires collaborations and sensitivity to interpret, but we need to have clear data on all of the different elements, from what pathogens are circulating in the environment, to the movement of species across space and where they may be encountering other species, to the ecophysiological risks that may exacerbate spillover, and of course the climate dimensions, which may also cause changes in the risk over time. In terms of the data we have, given the importance of One Health to the collective health of all life on Earth, there has been enormous effort, including by Tim, who will talk later on in this call, to try to assemble databases to allow us to develop better models to understand what these risks might look like. But it's going to require an enormous amount of further work to develop the models that fit together these different puzzle pieces and give us a mechanistic understanding of when we may see enhanced risk, and of course, how we might manage those risks. So a few outstanding questions that I will leave you all with as we go through the rest of the call. Obviously, building better databases, including of animal interactions, of pathogens circulating in the environment, and of course, critical species data in terms of where species are key elements of being able to develop sophisticated models to understand these risks. We also require different types of data because, as all of you will know, ecology is inherently complex. We need to understand where species are moving in the environment, the various ecophysiological limitations, and we also need to be able to build out indicators so that organizations such as the Convention on Biodiversity, as well as other national surveillance institutes, can actually monitor the risks of One Health and proactively manage what those risks look like. Whilst there has been decades of work in some pathogens, such as malaria, for other pathogens, including many that are carried by vertebrates, we still have a fairly superficial understanding at the moment, and a huge amount of further collaborative work will be needed in order to develop the types of sophisticated model we need to better understand spillover and to mitigate those risks. And so we need diverse working groups that have the skills needed to develop these kinds of approaches and to provide us all with a more secure future. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you all for listening, and I think over to you, Helena.
Right. Thank you so much, Alice, for jumpstarting the conversation today. And I'm excited to represent our GeoHealth Community Practice team. Our co-chairs are John Haynes and Didier Davignon, and our former co-chair was Julie Tartan and Alice Lau, who is the work plan liaison. And so we're excited to share this and invite you to join part of our community practice as well as we work collaboratively with GEO BON. As part of the GeoHealth Community Practice, John and Julie have been the co-leads since about 2017, but the GeoHealth Community Practice has been beyond that. So we've been around for quite a while. An organization where it's a global network to seek different practical uses of Earth observation data to be able to enhance how we make decisions across various levels. We hold bi-weekly, every 2 or 3 weeks, community teleconferences where the wider community practice can meet and talk about different topics as they come across the year. And more specifically, community practice members meet at different meetings throughout the year, specifically the American Geophysical Union, which is held every year in December, the Geo Symposium, as well as the regional Geo Symposia across the globe. And the AmeriGeo Week, notable to our region, which occurs every August in the region of the Americas. Specifically, the community practice members are able to work organically across different work groups. There are 6 work groups that obviously span across different One Health topics. And so this offers deep dives on multiple topics, whether it's from data modeling to more fieldwork applications. And so a great opportunity for learners of all levels to join and contribute. So the community practice falls under the Geo Work program in this strategy. There's been some modifications over the last 10 years and beyond. More specifically, this last year, the community practice was asked to prepare a white paper early in 2024, and that white paper was discussed during the Geo Executive Board meeting. And as a result, One Health was no longer considered a cross-cutting theme per se, but more of a thematic focus area. And as you can see, that's where we're located. In addition to some of the revisions with the work program, the structure also had some modifications. The GeoHealth Community Practice is considered a convener. The former titles of flagships, initiative, and pilots are now categorized under research to operations, pilot activities, and the enabling mechanisms are obviously what also support this structure. Some of the objectives that we have within the GeoHealth Community Practice that support the Geo Work program post-2025 relates to many elements. I'd like to highlight these 5 in particular. Vector-borne disease. Again, these align with some of the work group activities. So looking at being able to enhance some of the prediction and prevention systems when we think about vector-borne disease transmission and monitoring. looking at water-related pathogens, so in particular cholera among other waterborne pathogens, but looking about how to enhance some of those decision-making frameworks with different models and algorithms. Extreme heat, working especially with some of the heat experts within the GEO community practice, looking at developing some of the heat early action plans and early warning systems together with some of those experts across the globe, and in particular the GEO Global Health Resilience Service. Air quality, being able to take some of the new technologies we have, including some of the recent missions across the globe, and how those data are helping us revolutionize air quality research and applications. And of course, being able to build some of those bridges, especially when we think about the Met services and the ministries of health. As we think about One Health, many of us work in our silos, and we're trying to work outside of our silos. Working inside our silos can be important in some regards, especially as we're trying to develop really refined and robust expertise of our discipline. But we cannot broaden the science if we don't work outside of our silos. And so it's important really to look at those two elements and connect some of the expertise within the Met services and within the ministries of health. Some of the activities that we've done for more than a decade within the community practice has been across some of these levels. So some of the national and international engagement that we have, again, in addition to some of the scientific conferences, which are part of that kind of academic platform, we also provide a space for deep dives. And so many of those are offering flash talks or different type of knowledge exchange within the community practice, where we can speak with experts of different regions, in particular GEO of the Americas, African and European areas, and hold this space to be able to learn what other activities across One Health is actively occurring across some of these areas. Also, being able to strengthen some of the partnerships that we have with IAI, with the Pan American Health Organization, especially with the World Meteorological Organization. Many of those activities have become fruitful, especially during the pandemic, where earth scientists are able to contribute some of their expertise, especially trying to identify some of the etiology and the transmission drivers related to COVID. The GEO Global Heat Resilience Service was something that has also been developed as as one of the flagships, especially with the Ecosystem Atlas. And so that offers an opportunity with some of the heat experts within the community practice to contribute to the development of this service. And most importantly to highlight is some of the activities that individuals as well as the work groups have done phenomenal work, just even over the last 2 years, with different blog articles for the GEO community practice, as well as the white papers. In addition to the white paper that I referenced from the community practice that we submitted in early 2024 for discussion within the GEO Secretariat, each of the work groups have developed their own white papers, identifying how One Health is that cross-cutting link across their topic. And that's really going to help our deep dive conversations when we think about where some of those gaps exist, not only in the science, but also in our applications. In this image, you can see some of the research and community applications specifically with projects, again, aligned to some of the objectives that I previously mentioned. And some of the other work that we're doing is working with youth engagement. So some of the experts within our community practice have volunteered their time especially over the last 4 years, working with some of the RPI data science students to be able to help mentor them throughout some of their semester projects. And that has alluded to some poster presentations as well as publication. So it really has offered, again, kind of a look into helping with that new generation of scientists. So as to provide 2 brief examples of what some of the applications that are being conducted within the GeoHealth community practice, within some of those work group activities, and of course, as individual projects. Let's look at some cholera forecasting. So we know that cholera is underreported, in particular, estimated between 1.4 and 4 million annual cases across more than 50 countries. So it is an increasing concern, especially as we see as a climate sensitive disease related to some of the environmental parameters. High seasonal temperatures followed by increased rainfall, high population density, water insecurity, and even some of the natural disasters can increase the population risk or transmission of cholera. And so using some of the satellite data, Dr. Antar Jutla and his team from the University of Florida, working collaboratively with international stakeholders and partners, developed a cholera forecasting tool called the Vibrio Prediction Hub, and you can learn about more at the QR code. This This tool offers weekly forecast with 4 weeks of advance notice of cholera risk in Yemen, Ukraine, Ghana, Ethiopia, and many other selected African countries as they are requested by leading leaders within the country. And they're working together with some of these international agencies to be able to inform cholera risk reduction. This team is working now to be able to develop an Android-based app that can not only link some of the vibrio cholera microbiology and cholera risk assessments to end-user communication, including even the nearest hospital facility, so it can provide those on-the-ground tools for decision makers to be able to safeguard community health. This team has worked actively with the Afro-Geo community, in particular with their work in Africa at many of the previous GEO symposia. Another example of that has occurred is looking specifically at enteric diseases in satellite observations related to temperature, soil moisture, precipitation. Many of them, among others, are used to look at enteric diseases across the globe. Dr. Ben Zajcek and his team at the Johns Hopkins University, of course, other partners, and we can see have been able to harmonize a database of data from multiple enteric infectious disease studies, use that for some predictive modeling framework for the transmission risk. And in particular, they've developed this Shigella risk assessment tool. This has been able to provide many different types of visualizations of enteric pathogen estimates, especially when we think about that transmission for end users, in particular when they're looking at childhood enteric infectious disease transmission across multiple hotspots across the globe. And in particular, some similar data was used to be able to investigate some of the potential environmental risks that could influence COVID transmission early on in the pandemic. And we see some of those collaborations in this image. Although the social transmission signal overpowered specific environmental factors, this analysis offered a framework for best practices for research and relationships between COVID-19 transmission and some of the meteorological variables. And finally, some of the engagement that we have with the health community. Again, we are preparing for AmeriGeo Week 2025 in Colombia, but some of the achievements that the community practice as a whole has been able to present has some of the collaborations with the ministries of health and with medical students and other health professional students in these areas. So from Costa Rica and Ecuador, again, focusing on topics related to those countries, presenting scientific talks, offering a space for flash talks by experts, offering even an overview mixed with clinical cases on what a medical student would see in the clinic and what an earth scientist can offer as expertise for the health community to adopt some of these knowledge and skill sets. And about 2 or 3 weeks after our AmeriGeo One Health session, we always offer, for the last about 5 years, we've offered a special edition where those individuals who present posters, as well as those who are working in the area of the Americas, can present flash talks divided into categories so that if you're interested in working with air quality, we will have a category of air quality for those working in the area. Our work with being able to bridge some of these connections was highlighted last year as our team was selected for the Innovation Award. And in conclusion, the community practice is using the One Health framework as an integral part of our day-to-day activity, both as a community practice, but also as our individual work groups. We use the 4 C's, right? Being able to identify where some of the gaps exist and how we can leverage some of the expertise at a local, regional, or global level, and provide that through creating capacity building activities, multiple workshops, and opportunities for engagement. Being able to bridge some of those connections across our disciplines. So when we think about health through agriculture, biodiversity, water, air quality, among others, being able to improve how we craft our messages to the public. And that is a challenge across the board as we try to understand what our messages and our target audience, but that's extremely important. And that's why we work together with some of our stakeholders who know their communities really well. So we're working on those 4 C's, but most importantly, as all of us here, being able to promote some of these cross-cutting earth science applications and being able to emphasize the value that does offer as another toolkit for some of our health decision makers in those areas, and how we can use that to be able to improve and guide some of our policies, but also our health messaging to the public. We encourage all of you to be able to join our GEO Health community practice, and we look forward to collaborations with GEO BON moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Helena. Wonderful overview of the GEO One Health group and their work. Now I'll give it over to Tim, who is the lead of the GEO BON One Health working group.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. And we can see your screen.
Perfect. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the previous speakers for providing such a rich background on what I'm about to talk about today. I wanted to share some perspective maybe about what the process of designing and implementation of indicators for biodiversity and health would look like from a GeoBon perspective. And so it's also an opportunity for me to talk about the One Health working group within GeoBon and what role the GeoBon community at large could play into this conversation about biodiversity and health indicators. And I want to start from one of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is, I believe, 12.5, which says that we should try to reduce, recycle, and reuse. I think more broadly, this is a very good standpoint to think about the development of indicators, because every time we create a new indicator, which is very tempting to do from an academic point of view, we want the best calibrated instrument to quantify something. But we are creating this additional burden of reporting, of data collection, data acquisition, data integration. We are asking additional efforts to make sure that this indicator is actually reported. And so an alternative point of view is to say we should be reusing as much of the existing indicators whenever it's possible. So there's a couple of reasons for that I'd like to go through in the next slide. But there is thankfully a lot of work that is already here that tries to provide indicators to quantify changes in biodiversity, and some of them may be relevant to health. So as you know, the GeoBon community, we're going to think immediately about the monitoring framework of the KM-GBF. So many indicators here and so many work that led to the development and adoption of its indicators. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are also a panel of indicators associated to each of them. And within the more specifically One Health community, there is a high-level expert panel joint plan of action. And Francis actually went through that and the GBF to try to quantify the overlap between the two. And he is going to talk about these results in just a few minutes. I want to stress that I think avoiding duplication of indicators currently is very important, which is not to say that we should not be suggesting new indicators, but we should do that as sort of a last resort whenever there is a need for new indicators, because the process we want to quantify or capture are not properly covered by existing indicators. But the reason why avoiding duplication is important is because we ultimately want to see these indicators adopted by parties. And so if we lower the burden of reporting, we increase the chances to see adoption. If something is already reported, measured, and the data are already aggregated, the chances to see that reused in the context of biodiversity and health should be a little higher. Another point that is important to keep in mind that these indicators that already exist went through a long process of assessment. So we know they're informative, we know they're science-based, we know they're valid at different organizational levels, at different spatial scales. And there is also, there's been an agreement on indicators from multilateral treaties that are already here. And so that gives us a lot more solid ground, a better foundation to build work at the interface between biodiversity and health. That's particularly important of that to keep in mind, because the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health from the Convention on Biological Diversity is likely to be done on a voluntary basis. And so the reporting needs to be made easier if we want to see the big effort that we need to make on biodiversity and health for all the reasons that Alice mentioned in her presentation. And one of the interesting developments of the last year is that some biodiversity is now having a little bit of a special status. And so for those of you that followed the conversation around the WHO pandemic agreements, Article 12 establishes the pathogen access and benefit sharing system, which is specifically about mechanism for access to sequence information for pathogens. And as a bioscientist, it might be tempting to say, well, all DNA sequences are the same thing and they describe biodiversity, but some biodiversity is special because it can lead to more severe health outcomes. And so it needs to be managed in a way that is slightly different. This is a good thing. Equitable data sharing of genetic data for pathogens that are at risk of creating pandemics needs to be managed differently if we want to have better health outcomes. But as biodiversity scientists, we need to deal with this new reality and engage a community that's involved in data sharing and data management, and ultimately the data end users on the new reality and the new developments. And so there's a lot of things that are changing around the quantification of biodiversity and the description of biodiversity in its relationship to health that should lead us to do some introspection, but also some more communications. And then thankfully, you can contribute to that effort, and you can join the One Health working group, and I will be sharing a link in the last slide of this presentation. The One Health working group within GEO BON is relatively new. It had about 65 members currently, and we are expecting to get more, but not necessarily many more, as many as it needs. And we are thinking of this working group as a space to build collaborative projects. There's a lot of things that needs to happen in a collaborative setting because they are simply too big for a single person or a single group to do properly. So we really need the wisdom of the community here. There can be project on training and capacity building, can be a research project, they can be funding applications, or they can be thinking about data mobilization to make sure that the information that will be needed to report on new indicators will be available and will be interoperable. As a GEO BON benefits of this working group, we can also show the value of tools that we have been developing over the last few years, like for example, BON in a box, and how it can be used for biodiversity and health. And so the little screenshot on the side is something that we are working on currently with a postdoc in my group in collaboration with USDA and agencies from the Canadian and federal governments in Canada to look at biodiversity processes and how they can lead to the spread of raccoon rabies virus. And so that is a proof of concept of integrating some biodiversity data into the management strategies of these different agencies that is running on BON in a box as something that can be reused, as a template that can be adapted. More importantly, the big picture is that we can use the One Health working group to do more capacity building. The GEO BON community has immense expertise about biodiversity, both as the description of biodiversity as scientific field of study, but also biodiversity as something that can be measured to have an impact in policy making and decision making. And we have the potential to communicate this information more broadly to communities that are maybe new to the use of biodiversity data. And we have this part of responsibility to make sure that our expertise is broadly communicated. Medium term, I think there's a little bit of work to do for us collectively to rethink what the niche of GEO BON is in the relationship between biodiversity and health, and we can do that in a variety of ways. For example, evidence synthesis. So much do we really know? What are the gaps in our knowledge? What type of primary research is needed to fill in these gaps? Prior art. What existing science-based indicators do we know about? Can we develop new one? Can we provide some guidance about what new indicators are needed? Which of these indicators should be prioritized in reporting, which are feasible and relevant globally, and all of the previous expertise that was constituted around the creation of new indicators within GEO BON is going to be relevant again for biodiversity and health. We can help with networking by helping the best practices from our organization or other organization gets noticed. And then the bridges that we are starting to build with the GEO Community of Practice and Health, for example, is an effort in this direction to make sure that there's a lot of information flowing between the different partners. And then finally, all of these indicators are going to require data. And so contribution to the identification of data sources, but also contribution to making sure that data and the populating data sources is going to be required. And I'd like to conclude with an example of something that we've done as a sort of like first project of the GEO BON working group on One Health, which is a paper that was published last month in Bioscience. We're sort of thinking about all of the tools that we use for biodiversity monitoring, can they also be used for disease surveillance? And so we're sort of going through different lessons that were learned from the biodiversity monitoring world and trying to find the analog to these lessons in the biosurveillance world. And so thinking about essential biodiversity variables, the importance of having data providers with strong data specification for reusability, the importance of monitoring structure and having this eye from the local to the very global. And one of the things that was interesting in writing this paper is there's a lot of knowledge that we could contribute to other fields. There is a value of the work of GEO BON and the community of GEO BON for other fields. And so the more people contribute to these working groups and get actively engaged in the biodiversity and health conversation, the easier it will be for us to make this contribution and have a positive impact globally. Meanwhile, here's a link to the GEO BON working group page. And you'll notice that it says colleagues, plural, and there is only one colleague, singular, here, which is not good. And so this is also my little appeal to everyone here. If you are interested in making sure that biodiversity data, expertise, and tool can be used for biodiversity and health, please feel free to join the working group. If you want to take up some more leadership work in this working group, just please reach out. The goal is to have many more co-chairs with an eye towards maximum representation of the diversity of expertise, identities, and locations of people within the GEO BON community. And with that, thank you, everyone, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the webinar.
Thanks, Tim. That's really fantastic. Rich overview of the GEO BON working group. And now we're going to pass it over to Francis, who's going to talk about some of the specific works that he's been doing, looking at the overlap of indicators for biodiversity and health. So take it away, Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. So, hi everyone, I'm Francis Banville. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in biology at the University of Montreal, and also not a co-lead, but a regular member of the GEO BON One Health working group. So today I'm gonna present to you one project as part of the working group on the link between biodiversity indicators and One Health. So the goal of the working group is to assess the usability of biodiversity indicators for monitoring One Health actions. So we try to see if you can use biodiversity indicators to monitor human health, animal health, plant health, and environmental health. And when we talk about One Health actions, it's part of the One Health Joint Plan of Action, which was adopted in 2022. It was adopted by the quadripartite organizations, which is made of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the UN Environmental Programme, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health. And the One Health Joint Plan of Action is made of 6 action tracks, which are all made of different actions, activities, and deliverables. So I'm going to do a quick overview of them right now. So the first one is to enhance One Health capacities to strengthen health systems. The second one is to reduce the risk from emerging and re-emerging zoonotic epidemics and pandemics to make sure we don't go through another COVID-19. And to this end, recently, 124 countries adopted the World Health Organization Pandemic Agreement to make sure that we reduce the risk of future pandemics and that when future pandemics happen, that countries are better adapted to it. The third action track is to control and eliminate endemic and neglected tropical and vector-borne diseases. So we can think of dengue, for example. The fourth one is to strengthen the assessment, management, and communication of food safety risks. The fifth one is to curb the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance. And finally, the last one is to make sure that the environment is well integrated into One Health. So in total, there are 19 actions in the action tracks, in all of these action tracks, to make sure that we protect the health of humans, animals, plants, and the environment. So like Timothy told before, our goal is to see if we can use biodiversity indicators to monitor these actions of the action plan. And according to the principle of Timothy, reduce, recycle, and reuse, we looked into the Economy Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to see if among the 204 indicators of the framework, some of which are mandatory, others are optional, if some of them are linked to human, animal, plant, and environmental health, and if we can use some of them to monitor One Health actions. So our project has 2 parts. The first one is to assess the link between KM-GBF indicators and different aspects of health. And the second part is to assess the usability of indicators for monitoring One Health actions. So I'm going to start by presenting to you the first part of our project. So the objective of the first part is to assess how KM-GBF indicators are linked to human, animal, plant, or environmental health. So more specifically, we classified each indicator of the KM-GBF in relation to health. So that means that for each indicator, we assessed if they were either directly linked, indirectly linked, potentially linked, or not linked at all to human health, animal health, plant health, and environmental health. So now I'm going to present you 3 examples of indicators. The first one is a headline indicator 5.1, which is a proportion of fish stocks within biologically sustainable levels. So this is a measure of the sustainability of the world's marine captured fisheries. So because we talk about the sustainability of marine fish, it's a measure that is directly linked to environmental health. It's also indirectly linked to human health because many populations depend on fisheries for protein intakes. Second example of indicator is headline indicator 7.2, which is the pesticide environment concentration and/or aggregated total applied toxicity. And/or is because parties agreed that they can choose if they report on either the first part or the second part of the indicator. And this is an indicator that is related to the risk to the ecological communities based on the combined risk to different species groups on the use of total pesticides. So because we talk about toxicity, it's a measure that is directly linked to all aspects of health. Finally, the last example is component indicator 11.ct.2, which is the proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality. So what it's meant by good is water that doesn't damage ecosystem function or human health. So it's also a measure that is directly linked to human, animal, plant, and environmental health. So in total, we found that 72% of KM-GBF indicators are either directly or indirectly linked with human, animal, plant, or environmental health. This is a lot. So it means that when we measure biodiversity, we often also measure different parts of health, or different aspects of health. So it brings me to my second part of our project, which is the usability of KM-GBF indicators for monitoring One Health actions. So the objective is to identify which indicators can be used to monitor One Health actions. So what we did is that for each KM-GBF indicator, we assessed if they were directly usable after adaptation, or not usable for monitoring One Health actions. So we associated directly usable indicators usable after adaptation with specific One Health actions. So these are the preliminary results. So we found that for mandatory indicators, so binary and headline indicators, half of them were directly usable or usable after adaptation to monitor action track 6, which is the action track about the environment. And about 22% of indicators of mandatory indicators were related to infectious diseases, so action tracks 2 and 3. Moreover, if we include also optional indicators, so if we include component and complementary indicators, we find similar results. So here I just want to point out that 84% of indicators can be used to monitor One Health actions, which is a lot. However, we didn't find any indicators that were directly related to action tracks 5, the one about antimicrobial resistance. So in our project, I really put forward the link between KM-GBF indicators and health, and also the potential to use them to monitor One Health actions. So overall, I hope all of our presentations really convince you that we can collaborate well to better monitor One Health. So thank you, and I know we are a bit late on schedule, but we still have 10 minutes for questions, I think. And here is again the link for the One Health working group if you want to see what we're doing or if you want to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you to all of our speakers. That was exceptionally diverse presentation of topics. We heard about One Health, disease spillovers, predicting the effects on environmental change on human health, specific issues related to indicator use and the logistics of that, and now adding a complexity of a very complex indicator for biodiversity and health. And then the summary by Francis, trying to marry these ongoing policies where we already have indicators developed to see if we can reuse or recycle some of those indicators already in place. Now, I'll open the floor to questions if there's anything specific you want to ask our speakers. Otherwise, we can have a general discussion about how we can engage together in this very complex topic. I see that there were some questions that were already answered in the Q&A, and these are related to benefits from animals versus humans and seeing wildlife as potentially dangerous originators of zoonosis, although we know this is much more complex than that. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I see one from John Wilson. He says, this is for Francis. So he understood that there will still be a significant number of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework indicators not related to environmental health. Is that surprising? Is that a correct understanding, Francis?
Yeah, actually, I didn't go into too much detail, but actually, when I associated indicators to action tracks, I associated them with the main action track that were related. So many of them were related to more than one action track, including environmental health, but I just kept the main one. So it's less than half of them that were not associated to environmental health. Yeah.
Okay.
Does it answer your question?
Yes, yeah. I was just worried if some weren't related, that would be concerning.
There's another one for you, Francis. Is there any interest on evaluating index to evaluate soil health, especially to assess risks in agriculture and presence of herbicides in soil? That one's in the chat.
You mean in the KM-GBF or?
There are specific indicators on pesticides within the KM-GBF. So the CBD has been looking more at One Health, but it wasn't explicitly included in the initial version of the KM-GBF. There had been a potential target suggested by the UK, but it was not picked up as part of the initial monitoring framework. But they do have an appendix on One Health that was issued at the same time. They are now looking at having additional One Health indicators, which Francis and others are looking at, so that these would be more of an accompaniment to the actual KM-GBF, and soil health is better captured not from their perspective as a One Health indicator, though of course it does have major One Health implications, but it is already encoded within the framework, within the pollution indicators.
Thanks, Alice. I hope that answers the question. I see Tim is typing an answer to this one, but I'll ask this one from Alexander. So concerning the indicators, do communities find some of their characteristics more important? Is it the ease of data collection? Is it the ease of understanding it and that maybe a relationship? Is it difficult to balance usability with robustness? Those are very loaded questions. Francis, Tim, do you want to try to address those?
I can try. So yeah, ease of understanding. The point of indicator is not to be tools for outreach and scientific communication. They're tools in support of making good decisions. And so we are not thinking about indicators that can be understood by 8 billion people on Earth. We are, indicators need to inform the work of people that are going to enact these decisions. That being said, the more pressing concerns are ease of data collection, but about also the usability of data and whether or not the data already exists. And then it's difficult to balance some of that with robustness, presumably, and it's difficult to give a general answer. It's going to vary on an indicator by indicator basis. I think something that should be an important design consideration is there need to be a relevance globally. We want everyone to rely on the same indicators, but the trade-off is between the global relevance, but also the national feasibility and informativeness. So there's as many many such considerations that are going to weigh on the design of each specific indicator. And there was not a very clear yes/no answer, but the answer is it's going to be a very complicated process regardless.
I'm just going to build on that because, of course, GEO BON is very complex, but we also have the Conservation Genetics Working Group, and they provide a really good indication of how a good indicator is a balance between something that provides enough information to accurately inform a decision, but is not so overly complex that it both can't be comprehended and will not be something that governments select. So the Coalition on Conservation Genetics worked with a number of governments to basically trial an indicator, the Population 500 indicator, to see what would be a good indicator for genetic diversity. Now, of course, when governments hear about genetics, they think about something that is massively complex, and often they will shy away from it. And when we went through the process of selecting indicators as part of the monitoring framework, indicators that governments did not understand, that seemed expensive, complicated, or difficult to roll out, were not selected. And so what the selection of that indicator really highlighted was partnerships between scientists and governments are how we select scientifically informed indicators, because you can demonstrate they work at a national level. But it also shows that a good indicator has to provide enough information so that it's not going to make you make the wrong decision, but it is also not so complicated that governments and those who have to act on it will run away from it and not comprehend it. And so the selection of indicators we need to look at has to meet that pragmatic set of criteria so that we can collect it from multiple countries, because otherwise countries will not get involved. But if it's too simplistic, obviously it wouldn't indicate what we need it to. And so we need to consider all of those as we try to partner together to develop effective and sensible indicators.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it, Alice. It's a very balanced, it has to be very balanced. And unfortunately, it's master of all, and expert of none. It has to strike a very fine balance. I see one more question in the Q&A. It's about antimicrobial resistance. So this person was surprised to hear no indicator linked to 85. I'm not sure what that is, but I assume it's related to antimicrobial resistance. So there should be a number of connections to AMR, biodiversity loss itself, for instance. For example, soil in lack of biodiversity can store antimicrobial resistant bacteria and make them become dominant. Any thoughts on that? It's a little bit specific.
I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why we need to have a diverse working group. There are huge numbers of people, particularly in medical fields, that are working on AMR, but we can only do as much as we have the expertise to do. And so if that is something you are interested on and you are interested on talking to us about, that is how we take these indicators forward and make sure that they are as effective and robust as they need to be.
I think I'll just jump on what Alice said, which is true and incredibly important, but also a criticism that has been made against the One Health approach, which I think has some truth, and we need to recognize that, is it ends up being a all is in all sort of approach in the end. And because we want to end up with indicators that are specific, I think it's important to resist the temptation to draw fuzzy connections between topics and to focus on what has a direct link. But the only way we can do that is by making sure that this process is informed by the collective expertise. And so the more people get involved, the more we can do this triage of this is a direct link or this is an indirect link that's maybe not quite as strong as we think it should be.
Very good point, Tim. If there are no other last questions, maybe I'll give it to Tim. I know you were just answered really and gave some broader feedback, but as the lead of the One Health Working Group, do you have any final messages? Whatever actionable things are these new members do? How should they get involved? Your last thoughts on this?
I'll try to take no longer than 45 minutes. I have a few thoughts about that. No, I'll try to be very brief. I think one of the advantages of One Health, because it's such a broad approach, it's a process. So it is what the One Health community makes of it. And every time we can feel a little tension or frustration or, oh, One Health should be this, or One Health should not be so much about that, that is a sign to get more involved and drive the conversation in these specific ways. One of the most overrepresented expertise in this working group, because that's a historical effect, is infectious disease and spillover. There is so much more to biodiversity and health than that. There's very important aspect about mental health, about the health of urban communities, about traditional ecological knowledge, about the consequences of biodiversity and health for indigenous people in local communities that are currently severely underrepresented in the working group. And so my final thought is we desperately need some help from people that have the expertise in here, just because it's the collective work of understanding the relationship between biodiversity and health needs everyone to contribute, even if just a little bit. And if you're not sure that you want to contribute to One Health approach, I still encourage you to sign up, hang around the group for a little while, see if that's for you. And if it's not, that's fine. If it is, then you probably have something very important and meaningful to contribute to the work that we're doing. So these were my parting thoughts for the future of the group. Thank you, Katie.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I think we'll leave it there. I want to thank our speakers. Please join me in thanking them. And thank you all for joining us. Again, this recording will be shared, and I hope you learned something. You got a little bit motivated to maybe join the group. And we hope to see you in this collaborative effort. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.